Indeed, I have a banana ready. I presented evidence for my claim. But what is evidence? How is our understanding of the world affected by evidence? What counts as evidence? And why should we care for and be careful about them? I am Dan from the Christian think tank, and I have a banana ready for eating later. For the first claim I made, it seems pretty obvious, especially for those of you who have listened to me before. Yet, for the second claim, you likely doubt it unless I give you some means for you to trust me. One way to do so is to show it here in front of the camera and peel it open near the microphone. Indeed, I have a banana ready. I presented evidence for my claim. But what is evidence? How is our understanding of the world affected by evidence? What counts as evidence? And why should we care for and be careful about them? Let's think about it. Imagine you are walking on a path when you come across some crumbs scattered on the ground. There's nothing remarkable about this, at least by itself. But what makes it interesting is what you can infer. Maybe there was food brought here on this path. The claim food was brought here on this path is either true or false. You are led to believe that it is likely to be true because you have evidence to suggest it, the crumbs. Evidence for a claim is whatever supports it. That is, evidence raises the likelihood the claim is true. Put another way, if you did not encounter the crumbs, you would not have evidence that the claim food was brought here on this path was true, regardless if it were true or not. How can we see evidence supporting a claim? Returning to our crumbs, there is a process by which we inferred food was brought here on this path. And that process is called reasoning. Reading from a CTT Facebook post from May 2021, reasoning, or the application of logic, is taking data, interpreting it, and then using that data to increase the probability, that's a likelihood, a particular proposition, that's a claim, in an argument is true. For our example, taking data is taking what we see, that is, crumbs on the ground, and interpreting it is considering things we know related to what we see. For one, we don't normally see crumbs on the ground. We don't usually see crumbs manufactured by themselves. We typically see crumbs drop from food, and we can expect that others have walked on that path. These, the data and the interpretation, they altogether support the truth of the claim food was brought here on this path. We say that these give us good reason to believe the claim is true. Good evidence gives us good reason to believe a claim as truth. These then affect our judgments, our conclusions, and our decisions. It is important in our everyday lives, and it serves particularly essential roles in fields like history, law, medicine, and science. There are different types of evidence as well, depending on how they support the claim. The sight of the crumbs would be empirical evidence, evidence from direct observation or experimentation. If you told someone about it, or if you heard the story from someone else, that'd be anecdotal evidence. If this was written or captured on media, it would be documentary evidence. We saw too that interpretation and knowledge can also serve as evidence. In fact, a set of true premises can justify a claim if the claim follows from them. So, logical arguments also count as evidence. In general, we say evidence is strong or suggestive when it is relevant, reliable, and well supportive of its claim, while we say it is weak or questionable when it lacks any of these characteristics significantly. Different fields incorporate different appropriate types of evidence, depending on the type of truth it is set to know. Take science, for example. It is what we do to learn about the natural world. We do so by gathering knowledge through testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Because the truth science seeks is based on accurate predictions about the natural world, its evidence needs to be observable and testable by other people, often in controlled environments. This is an example of our empirical evidence that we said earlier. A different example is history. It is what we know of what has happened in the past. Unlike science, because history studies unique events that have already happened, it is not exactly something that can be tested and repeated. You don't run an experiment to learn if Julius Caesar became dictator of Rome. Instead, the evidence needed for history are documents, written records, archaeological findings, and eyewitness accounts. That sounds a lot like anecdotal and documentary evidence. It is inappropriate to impose one standard of evidence on another without acknowledging the differences between the truths they seek to find and the methods they do so. The evidence and standard are meant for specific purposes. Putting them outside of where they are appropriate leads to bad reasoning. If we imposed a scientific methodology on history, then we would have no good reason to believe anything in the past ever happened or that anyone in the past ever existed. If we impose the historical method on science, then there is no good reason we can ever predict the future inasmuch as we know of the past. These are called category mistakes or category errors. It is when we treat something as if it belonged to a certain category that it doesn't or has characteristics that it shouldn't. We must be careful not to make category mistakes when judging evidence. It's not just between scientific and historical truths. Moral truths regarding what is good and right are different as well from these two. Now, make no mistake, that is not to say that there is no overlap or similar means to assess certain truths and evidence among those fields. It is just worth saying, if it does not count as strong evidence with one standard, it doesn't mean we have no good reason to think the claim is true. It might be strong evidence in another standard. A prevalent category error in assessing evidence in our modern age is called scientism, the belief that science is the sole valid or authoritative way of acquiring knowledge about the world and reality. If something can't be proven true or likely by science, it's neither true nor useful, they would say. Here is a hilarious example by Mohammed Safa. If you are not a scientist and you disagree with scientists about science, it's actually not a disagreement. You're just wrong. Science is not truth. Science is finding the truth. When science changes its opinion, it didn't lie to you. It learned more. Science is indeed a reliable and powerful means of finding truths about the world, but it has its limitations, as we saw earlier in how scientific truths differ from historical and moral truths. It even has the biggest limitation of lacking a means to justify itself. Science is built on presuppositions we accept to be reliable for finding truth, such as there being some cause-effect relationship in nature that leads to natural laws, and that these natural laws are consistent across every place and every time. The following is an excerpt from a conversation I had with a friend. This friend and I, his name's Dave, discussed this topic, and he shared more presuppositions of science for us to consider.
The issue with that too is that science requires some sort of backbone, a set of rules, if you will, in
Right.
order for science to actually be properly conducted.
Right.
You can't just find out about something and assume it came out of thin air. Like, even, I think this person would even agree with that. But rather, there's already some truth there that you are finding out about.
But these presuppositions aren't proven by science, and they can't ever be proven by science. These are metaphysical claims, claims about reality, that can only be assessed philosophically, and thereby known outside of science. And that does it for this episode. On this episode, we learned about evidence, how it leads us to truth by good reasoning, and the different types of evidence for different types of truths. We also looked at category mistakes, how we can commit them when we inappropriately impose one standard on another, and the prevalent category mistake of scientism. What are your thoughts on the episode? What do you think about evidence? What other types of evidence have I not mentioned here? What are other means by which we assess evidence? And what other mistakes can we possibly make in assessing evidence? Is there another prevalent category mistake of our time or of another time that people make when they assess evidence? Feel free to share in comments or send us a message over at the Christian Think Tank. We would love to hear your thoughts. For those of you who are watching, how do you like this format of me mostly narrating and changing the text and visuals on screen as opposed to it being a clip of just me talking? Do you like this format, or do you want to return to what we've been doing? Do you wish to see something else? Feel free to share it. If you are a listener, is this episode good to listen to? Is Think About It something worth your time, even with its short form? And is any of our content in CTT worth listening to? Feel free to share your thoughts. We'd love to listen to them. And as a last ending for this episode, be careful with evidence for your claims and with other claims. And be careful as well with how you and others assess evidence for claims. And as always, keep thinking.